Well, good morning and nice to see everybody on this beautiful Tuesday morning, the second day of the year, of the trading year. Hope everybody's having a great time right now so far. Obviously, things are a little bit different as we looked at yesterday's markets. Yesterday's markets, just that cascade to the downside was something that was definitely probably surprising for most, especially given some of the indications we had early on yesterday. You know, it was about midday when we started to turn and at least get off of those lows. But you know, it was interesting to see the Dow actually get back underneath 30,000. That was something that was pretty unique and surprising, I think, for all of us. Still finished down nearly 400 points, but well off of those lows that got beneath that 30,000 level. You had the NASDAQ finished down about 190 points after rallying from those midday lows, as well as the S&P. Sort of the same thing. When you look at the S&P, we were getting pretty beaten down there and then just finished down about 55 points. So very, very interesting moves, especially given, like I say, what was going on in the pre-market, some of the shifting that we had there. We had volatility. We talked about this yesterday, and I talked about this on the halftime report as well. But when you look at December, and the volatility essentially was somewhere in a range of 20 to 25, and then suddenly we get into the first day of the year and we spike up to where we spiked, and suddenly we hit near 29. So a lot of activity, obviously a lot of volatile moves within the market. Even the volatility and velocity of those moves throughout the day was something pretty interesting. Still finishing up at well above where we had been in December in terms of some of those spikes that we had there towards 25. We actually finished closer towards 27 yesterday on the volatility index. I'll tell you what really was interesting again. And of course, on a very volatile day, you're going to have this kind of paper. But the fact that we finished with 40 plus million contracts yesterday, that was a pretty monstrous day, a nice start off to the new year, a very, very strong performance. And it looks like so far, at least early on, this first hour or so, we're looking at another pretty strong performance as well. It was a lot of bullish paper, though, yesterday. And I think that's really important. By the way, if you have any questions, you can send them in to the Q&A. We'll do that at the very end after we hit an unusual option activity as well. And by the way, this is the take for Market Rebellion. I forgot to mention that. But the interesting part was the activity that we were seeing yesterday was bullish, 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 bullish all the way through. It was very few bearish positions on the unusual that we had seen. And as a matter of fact, I got to run through some of these because they're in the sectors that you probably, something, if you've been following the take, you can certainly say, well, that was pretty much expected. So the material space, we had a lot of activity. We had activity in Freeport Mac. We had it in, matter of fact, I talked about this one, SUM yesterday, Summit. This one was pretty interesting because we don't see this as often. But in the material space, AA, another one of those names, we had Micron, we had SMH and TSM yesterday. That was one of the unusuals. I used TSM yesterday on the halftime report for unusual. But we had a lot of activity across the semiconductor space, and then the precious metals. We've been talking about how this has been an area, especially in the last maybe week, 2 weeks of 2020, in a very strong market. We were still seeing some pretty interesting activity in the GLD, GDX, some silver. We talked about silver junior miners paper. We had Fortuna yesterday. That was a final trade that I had on the halftime report. GDX, GLD, a lot of activity across the precious metals as well. Energy did finish into the green yesterday, and energy starting off very nicely today. We had the industrials, financials, and tech. That was really sort of what was pulling on the markets yesterday, all down better than 1%. And some of the areas that we had some of the strength and weaknesses, that we had the strength really in some pretty interesting names, I thought. When we look at L Brands and Tapestry, throw in Tesla, throw in Walgreens, throw in Freeport, a nice broad view of what people were looking at yesterday, and so where we were finding some of the strength. The weakness was something we talked about yesterday early on, which was cruise ships and airlines and hotels. And then obviously take a look at some of the industrial space that was struggling a little bit. Boeing, the leader there, Dow as well. We had Peloton, we had Netflix. There was some definite weakness across many of the sectors, obviously, when you have a market down that far and you take a look at what was going down with the NASDAQ as well. But we're still seeing jittery markets today. You look at the pre-market, and even in the pre-market, we had some huge shifts. We were pretty positive early, moved into the negative. We started off, and then we started kicking things around, and we started actually moving back up to the upside. Then we started pulling back once again. Quickly, we were up 100 points. Then we were only up about 20 points. So we are definitely seeing some volatility. We had a nice spike in volatility. As a matter of fact, we were up towards 28 once again, 28 somewhere. Matter of fact, I wonder if January, because of earnings and because of all the news and obviously the election that we're talking about, everybody's been focusing on for today, there's a lot of different catalysts out there that could certainly be shifting around markets for us. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that. But I can tell you this, we had a busy day yesterday, and again, very, very bullish paper yesterday across the board. So that does sort of go contra to what we were seeing yesterday in terms of the market being down, although we did finish well off of those lows, as I say. So early on, we look like we're fairly positive. We definitely have some volatility. We had energy up about 2% early. We had some other areas that were actually participating pretty nicely. You look at the industrial space, you look at materials, you look at tech, you look at financials, all up about 0.5% or more. All the sectors were green early, of course, but like I say, we've been seeing some very, the velocity of these moves just continues to be at another level, and the movement within what we are seeing early on. So that's something that stands out. But when we focus on specifically the leader of today, at least to the upside, and you look at energy, boy, these beta names are still on absolute fire. And as a matter of fact, we might have one for unusual today, but we had Apache, we have Diamondback, we have Halliburton, we have Occidental, we have Marathon Oil, we have all these different names, Devon Energy, all these different names, all really, really strong early on. I'll give you another strong one, and we had some unusual in it yesterday. As a matter of fact, we've had multiple hits over a fairly short period of time. But if you do go back to August, I was responding to somebody earlier today on social media. You go back to August, stock was in the 42s. So not too terribly far off of those lows. We were seeing buyers and bullish buying, and we've continued to see that all the way up and through yesterday when the stock actually hit new highs again yesterday. So the option paper has been very, very clear about the opinions on Micron, and it certainly has caught on a nice big run to the upside, and a pretty rapid run to the upside considering where it was just back in August in the 42s. And here we are pushing towards the 80s today. Now, matter of fact, up about 5%. But the semiconductor is definitely leading the NASDAQ today. When you take a look over at Applied Materials and KLAC 10 Core and Lam Research, those types of names seem to be in control, but then throw in Micron, of course, and some of the other names. We even had a little activity today in NVIDIA as well. So we're seeing activity across a wide group of sectors as well. And it's just been really, really a nice, interesting start to the year. Yes, I know yesterday we were down, but there was so many different news stories that people were grasping onto, why we were up early, why we pushed to the downside, and the back and forth. And certainly that's something that I think we're going to continue to see, obviously, as I said earlier, throughout the month. So a little unusual option activity. I talked about some of these energy plays, and Apache stuck out for me right out of the gate today. One of the early hits, about 5,000 of the January 16 calls were bought today. Average price, call it around 70 cents. The stock is interesting because just the other day we had some buyers of the February 15 calls. So now they're buying the January 16 calls. It shows you that there's some activity, and that beta that I talk about, those moves have been very, very rapid and more to the upside than the downside. Certainly we've watched energy as it's flowed back and forth, but all you've got to do is take a look at any of the names that I brought up in terms of those beta names specifically, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about from the start of November through to now. And you will see exactly what we're saying, which is a pretty direct move to the upside with some stops along the way, but a pretty direct move. Matter of fact, we're seeing a pretty nice move out of Exxon and some of the other spots in energy today. So it's not just the beta names, but we are seeing a pretty solid move to the upside. Of the 11 unusual options that we had in the first call it maybe 45, 50 minutes of the trading day, about half of those would probably fall in the category of expiring Friday. So we are seeing, believe it or not, that's an expansion of some of the further out options that we are starting to see, because it was almost dominating to the point where it might have been maybe 8 out of 10 or so were on the side of very, very short term. Now we're at least seeing that sort of break down a little bit, and closer to a little less than 50% are very short term, and the rest are pushing out towards February, maybe even in July, and some of those different types of expiration cycles. So real quick, we're going to hit a couple of questions, Q&A, and if you haven't shot them in, shoot them in now. We've already got a pretty decent amount, but I'm going to get through a couple and then we're going to go. Did Teva hit on the unusual? Yes, we have seen Teva recently, and I've heard a lot of people talking about that name as well. I am not in there. Am I in there? I don't think I'm in there presently. No, I am not. I was in Teva, but I am not in it right now. Let's see, a real quick one with Pete. I've seen Baba, January 8th, calls the 240s, some pretty good volume. What's your take on Baba? That was really an interesting story yesterday. Everybody talking about Jack Ma, the disappearance of Jack Ma, and all the rest of this. I really didn't buy a whole lot into that whole thing. I think that I would say this: the Chinese names become more and more difficult all the time. And you can go back to Luck and Coffee, where we had a really incredible run to the upside, and then suddenly they pull the rug out and they're not trading. That's where we stand. And I think that is some of the concerns that I have. That's why I think if you are involved in some of those, specifically the Chinese names, but I even extend this out to essentially most of the emerging markets as well, I would far more prefer to be in the option side of things than the stock side of things, because with the stock side of things, you really can be trapped. I think with the options, at least you know going in exactly what your risk reward is going to be if something odd were to happen, if something was delisted, whatever the case may be, whatever the news story, at least you have the knowledge of, I paid 50 cents for these options, I bought 10 of them, that's my full risk, and a worst case scenario, they go out at zero, I know what I've lost. At least you have that in your head, and it's a little bit easier. And we talk about risk reward all the time. We talk about it, especially when we're talking in the parameters of where the volatility is at that time. And certainly when we get volatility down to the lower levels, a lot more option activity that gives you opportunities. When you get to the higher levels of the volatility, a much more better opportunity, in my opinion, to have a position in stocks and then selling options against that. And in a case of something like these Chinese names, I'm definitely going to be spreading those off if they're more expensive options. So just have as much knowledge as you possibly can if you're going to be delving into some of these different parts of the marketplace, because it can be very, very complicated, and you don't want to be frustrated by that. If you want more knowledge on the option side of things, obviously Market Rebellion, we educate people as well, and that's something we're extremely proud of. All right, next, with Georgia teetering, should we be buying VIX or DOG calls? Well, I've always talked about the VIX, as everybody knows. I've been at CNBC since January of 2007, started on Fast Money with Dylan Radigan and the gang, and been talking about volatility ever since. And I will tell you this, we talk about it, we use it as a reference point, but when it comes down to it, a lot of the time what we do and what John does, what I do is something a little bit different than the VIX itself. Doesn't mean you can't trade the VIX, but it seems that the better way for me to be able to trade it is to use the VIX, to use those numbers, and then go over to the SPY, the SPY options. So that's my take on that. And so I would probably hesitate on the VIX options and say, I think you get better bang for your buck potentially with those spider options that you could use against positions based upon what you're seeing in the VIX. Hi, Peter, you still in Cryoport trading it? Scott, I'm in it. I'm not trading it. I've owned this stock for a really long period of time. I think they are unique, and I think they are one of those folks that is sitting in a great position where they really have limited competition, if any, in what they do. And so whenever you can find something like that, I think that's a great spot to be. I love the name. I think the company does a great job of execution on what they are doing, and I am continuing to hold it, not trade it. Okay, I hope that answers your question pretty clearly. Any unusual in FSLR? No, not very recently. We've had some fairly recently, in the last couple of weeks or so, but we haven't really seen some until we, since we saw that buying of the 105s, then the 110 calls, and then stock kind of eased back off of that level. I love this name. You've heard me maybe talk about it on plenty of different occasions, but yes, it's a great name. If you want to be in the alternative space, when you look at their balance sheet, the fundamental side of the story, I am a big believer in that name. I miss Dylan Radigan, Pit Boss. You know what? I think we all do. I think that that there's a lot of great hosts out there. I still put him as one of the very best. I think Dylan did a great job of moving the ball around, and oftentimes when you've got four people that's not an easy task, but I think Dylan really did an amazing job with that. So we all miss him, and he had a lot of fun. He had a great personality. He was the reason, amongst others, but he was definitely my top reason for why I became somebody who was part of the Fast Money crew at the very beginning of that show. The last question, let's see. Where do you see Apple going in Q1? I think Apple just continues to, if we can believe what we are hearing from all the analysts about what Apple has been able to accomplish so far in terms of not just here in the US, but maybe internationally and in China, it sure seems to me like I'm hearing more and more about demand. And if the demand is anything close to what we are being told, it seems to me that Apple is on the right path to continue to be very, very strong. I love the name. I was in calls and stock. I am no longer in the calls, not because I'm negative, not because anything changed other than those calls worked out. We had a really nice rally, as we all know, in Apple. I took that position off because that's part of the discipline. And for now, I'm not in the calls, but I am certainly going to be in the stock for an extended period of time. And if I see some calls come back in there that intrigue me, I will be right back in the calls as well. All right, guys. I know there's a lot more questions. Sorry, I know we're all really busy. We all got to get in front of our computers and get back at it. Good luck today. Have a great day of trading. I will see you here tomorrow with Market Rebellion. Until then, you won't see me on the halftime report till Friday. So I look forward to seeing you Friday as well. Folks, have a great day of trading.